You probably won't be the best. Not in your class, not in your field, maybe not even in the things you care about the most. And yeah, I know that sounds harsh, but I think it's also honest because if you look around, there's always someone just a little bit better, a little bit faster, a little bit smarter, a little more consistent, and you can feel it. You don't even have to compare. It's just there. Like, yeah, that's the top, and I'm not in it. I felt that a lot. In high school, there was this girl, and I talked about it before, but the high school I go to is very competitive. And this girl got into Yale. And it wasn't surprising. Everyone knew she was at the top. But then a few days ago, I was looking at Instagram, I was doom scrolling, and someone I knew from middle school who was widely considered to probably be the smartest person from our middle school, Harvard. And this also wasn't a shock because, I expected these people to go into crazy places. But then I was just sitting there like, okay, where does that put me? Because when you're in this position, you're not failing. You're not at the bottom, but you're not at the top either. You're just somewhere in the middle. And I think that's a weird place to be that no one really talks about. We celebrate the top, we help the bottom, but if you're in the middle, you're just expected to figure it out. And it's quiet. It's a quiet kind of pressure because you're good enough to see what greatness looks like, but you're not close enough to claim it. And that gap messes with you. You start asking, am I just not built for it? Is this just my level, my position in the world? Maybe I'm just average. And that word, average, it hits harder than failure sometimes. Because at least failure has motion. Average feels like you're stuck. Because it's as if the story has already decided how far you can go. And you're just living it out. And I used to believe that. I used to think, if I'm not the best, then what am I doing? What's the point? And then hearing all these stories and seeing everyone go their separate paths, something shifted. Not in a big aha moment, but slowly I realized that it's not that they were better in every way. It's just that they were better at a very specific game, a very specific definition of what counts. It's very cliche to say, but school rewards a certain type of person. Someone who can sit still, focus, memorize, execute, hit every mark on time again. We talked about it a little bit in the last video, right? And that's impressive, yes, but it's also narrow. It's one version only of being the best, quote unquote. And if you don't fit that perfectly, you start thinking you're behind when really you're just misaligned. And that word, misaligned, that is everything because it doesn't mean you're less. It just means you're pointed somewhere that isn't being rewarded right now. And I know that's frustrating because you can feel something in you, but you can't prove it. Not in the way that counts. Not in the way people clap for. So you start doubting it. You start shrinking it. Maybe it's not real. Maybe I'm just telling myself that. But I don't think that's true. I think a lot of people who are never the best are just harder to measure in traditional senses. Because the truth is, it's impossible to measure how someone thinks, right? How do you measure curiosity? How do you measure someone who questions everything instead of just following it? You can't really do that. So they end up in the middle. Not because they're average, but because there's no category for them. And that creates this tension where you're capable, but not validated. And that lack of validation, that gap, it can break you, or it can force you to build your own definition. Because when you're not the best, you don't get to hide behind it. You don't get to say, this is just who I am. You have to figure it out from scratch. What do I actually care about? What do I want? Not what looks impressive, not what gets approval, but what feels real, what makes me feel alive, and what makes me feel unique. And that's slower, way slower. And it looks worse on paper, but it's yours. And that matters more than people admit. Because no one is living your life. No one is inside your head. No one feels what you feel. So why are you letting someone else's path decide your value? Why does their acceptance become your rejection? It doesn't make sense, but we do it all the time. We look sideways instead of forward. We compare chapters that aren't even the same story. And then we feel behind in a race we didn't even choose. And that's the part that really changed things for me. Your story is the only one that matters. And I know it's cliche, but I do not mean this in some cheesy way, but I mean it in a real way. Because at the end of the day, you are the one who has to live with it. You're the only person who has to live with your life. You're the one who has to wake up inside your decisions. So if you're building a life just to match someone else's, or to match what everyone else expects of you, or what everyone traditionally expects of success or being quote unquote the best, you're going to feel it. Even if you win, it won't feel like yours. And that's worse than not being the best. Truly. Because at least here, at least in the middle, you still have space. Space to choose, space to explore, space to build something that actually fits you. And yes, building is messy. It doesn't come with rankings or clear signals or instant proof. And many times not even statistics to back it. It's just you trying, failing quietly, adjusting, and continuing without knowing if it will work. And it's uncomfortable, but it's real. And that matters so much more. And over time, it becomes something not because you were the best, but because it was yours. So, yeah. You probably won't be the best. Statistically, you will not be the best. But that was never the point. The point is whether the life you're building actually feels like yours. And if it does, then you're not behind. You're not even close to being behind. You're just finally on your own path. See y'all later.